Now, my understanding is that the theme of this conference is getting back to our roots. And I want to propose a different approach for a couple of reasons. One is because I'm feeling mischievous today. Secondly, because I think it's always more interesting when people present, I was going to say, unbalanced points of views. I think particularly in Britain's or British culture, we're always so used to sort of being reasonable and presenting both sides of the argument. And I'm not going to do that. I'm going to pitch into this particular theme by saying I'm not playing devil's advocate in a way. And I'll decide at the end of this talk whether I believe in what I'm saying or not. But what I'm going to say now is I'm going to play devil's advocate and say, I don't think going back to our roots or being interested in our ancestors is of any value at all right now. I really don't. Why? Because our ancestors, if they're worth their salt, are not interested in our attention. They're more interested either in trying to sort themselves out in another galaxy or on another plane or whatever they're doing up there. They're either trying to sort out the awful mistakes that they made, or they are trying to be reborn. And their concerns are for future generations, not for themselves. So when I tune into the ancestors, I get them saying, no, 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 look, stop thinking about me and what I did in a previous incarnation. That's not the point. The only interest in connecting with your ancestry will be if your sense of identity needs some reinforcement. So I'm not dissing that. If it needs some reinforcement, if connecting with your ancestors helps you to feel more rooted and grounded and have more of a sense of identity, okay. But how much of our interest in the ancestors is actually coming from our ego, from that part of ourselves that wants to elaborate our story, that wants us to feel that we are interesting, that wants to be distracted from the far more pressing problems of our current life and our future life as humanity. I think ancestors worth their salt are looking towards the future and saying to us, guys, focus on the future. Make sure that what you do today and in the coming days creates a positive future for the world, not a negative one. It's as simple as that, really, I think. So I'm the other reason why I think focusing on the ancestors is problematic is that it encourages the belief that who we are is the result of our past. And you might say, well, that's obvious. Of course, who we are is the result of our past. But I'd like to suggest a different way of looking at this, which is that modern psychology has propagated the idea that we are conditioned by our past. That's in a sense all we are. And psychotherapy undoes the various knots or tries to undo the knots that have been tied and the distortions that have occurred like that. But there's a very interesting Jungian or neo-Jungian analyst called James Hillman. His work is fascinating. And he proposes a different approach, which he calls the Acorn Theory. And the Acorn Theory goes, when you look at an acorn, it's full of its potential and the future is calling to it. And in that acorn is the potential for a huge, beautiful oak tree. And it's the same thing with us, that we have potential within us. That is the call of the future is the most important thing, that the future is calling to us. Now, the potential may have been formed to a great degree by the past, but the suggestion here is that there's another element that we've ignored, which is the voice of the future. And in spiritual traditions, we're always aware of the way in which time is not quite as rigid and linear as it's presumed to be in the mundane world. And that, for instance, in Druidry and in paganism, we have particular times like Samhain, the summer solstice, Midsummer's Eve, and so on. where we sense the veil is thin between the worlds and we allow time to be flexible. And in fact, I love the idea in Samhain that we have in Druidry, certainly, that there are 3 days where time doesn't exist. And the whole use of oracles and divination works on this principle that our sense of time is like the surface of a river that's flowing. If you use some oracles, it's as if you can dive down into the water and get a sense of the currents and which way they're moving and where we're headed to, and maybe give us a warning that we need to steer ourselves in slightly a different direction. So all this is predicated on the idea that time isn't quite what it appears to be. And in fact, mystical experiences show us that our ground, the basis of our being, exists, the essence of our being exists in a timeless world, beyond time. So the concept of ancestors isn't even relevant at that stage, because it's like you're talking about something that's in the past. And what we're saying is, when we get to our true essential state, past and future don't mean anything. It's all the great now, the moment. So where does that leave us with ancestors and with roots? Well, the focus, I think, for me, is once you've got yourself rooted in the world, whatever that means for you, whether that means stability in your material circumstances, stability in your relationships, stability in how you feel in the world, how comfortable you feel in your skin, and so on. Once you've got that, you don't really want to keep digging them up and looking at them. We don't need to spend loads of time looking at our relationship with our nearest and dearest. If the relationship is good, we just get on with having a good relationship and having a good time together. And likewise with our material circumstances, if we've been lucky enough to sort ourselves out, we don't want to spend too much time thinking about them because they're sorted. When we plant something, we're very careful with the roots and the way that we clean the root. Not that we don't clean the roots, that's the whole point. The way we tease, if we buy a potted plant, for instance, we tease the roots out really, really carefully so that it doesn't get, what's that word, impotted. Root bound in a ball out of the pot. So you integrate it into the earth. So you do give some attention to the roots, but then you cover them up and you forget about them. So the message here is, forget about it. Once you've sorted your roots out, once you have a sense of where you come from and all that stuff, forget about it. Of course, it's interesting to do ancestry.com and see whether your granddad was a crook or a rogue or a philanthropist or whatever. But that's kind of detail. And that's not who they really were, because they've shaken that off. That concept of the second death, when the first death you shake off your body and then you're on the astral plane and you're floating around saying, oh, what just happened? Oh, you just died. Oh, gosh, really? I haven't got a body. Oh, crikey. And you're still, and then some teachings say that you then experience the second death. You realize, oh, I am dead. Okay, I'll let go of the baggage. And maybe it goes on through various sheaths or coverings of the self till you return to the source, have a nice time, a few pina coladas, and then you drop back down again into a new incarnation. So if that's the case, we're talking about the husks of the self. My personality, the particular quirks, the wit or the lack of it, the intelligence or the lack of it, and so on. These are just outer coverings of some sort of core inner essence. That's my belief, the soul. So let's, just as we don't want to spend too much time being preoccupied with, well, at least I don't want to spend too much time being preoccupied with clothing, with fashion, and too much time being preoccupied with trinkets and trimmings. Likewise, why should we be so interested in the trinkets and trimmings that our ancestors surrounded themselves with? And let's face it, they weren't, how many of them were great? If we take this analogy or this metaphor of the tree, roots and branches, our ancestors cut trees down endlessly, right from the beginning. Even from sort of Neolithic times, they were chopping trees down all over the place. Who's going to plant trees? It's going to be us and our children. So let's focus on the children. Let's focus on the next generations. Let's focus on planting trees. Let's not focus on thinking about our ancestors who, on the whole, cut them down. And sure, I mean, maybe, one of your ancestors created a beautiful arboretum in their, where they lived and all the rest of it. But yes, but the majority of our ancestors were actually chopping them down, sadly, I think. Yeah. They engaged in slave trading. They did all sorts of ghastly things. And do they exist? If you believe in reincarnation, I mean, are they really there? There, there. Their body's gone away, so they're definitely not here physically. If they've gone through a second death and they've sloughed off their personality because they don't want to carry that around into the next incarnation with all the same foibles and problems. So they've dropped that, so they're kind of pure essence or something like that. Well, I mean, if you believe in reincarnation, that pure essence is going to then incarnate and take on some other kinds of clothing that will give them different experiences in their next life. So why are you thinking about these people who don't exist on any level at all, even in the spirit world? If you don't believe in reincarnation, or you think it takes masses of time before you're reincarnated, then okay, then you might believe that the ancestors actually exist in the spirit world and you can connect with them, either because they're in the sort of waiting room, waiting to sort of jump back down and parachute down into a body, or because you don't believe in reincarnation and you believe that they exist in another realm, in the other world. And that's fair enough. And you might also believe that they somehow need saving. You might be listening to this and saying, yes, I know they were horrendous, most of them. That's why I need to think about them. I need to say prayers for them and do ritual for them to somehow redeem them. Well, leaving aside the arrogance in that idea and the hubris in that idea that you can do something or should do something, leaving that aside, there was an argument I was going to make and I can't think of it. You leave that aside, and do you really think that's the case? The extraordinary fact that is it the Mormons? I think it's the Mormons, possibly the Seventh-day Adventists, but I think it's the Mormons, have a huge nuclear-proof storage facility under a mountain in Utah or something like that, where the most complete genealogical records of humanity are preserved. And they do ceremonies to save people who died, to go back in time and redeem them. A bit like, I don't know the details, whether they baptize them into the Mormon church or just say blessings and prayers for them and all the rest of it. So you could do that. I mean, particularly if you were rather upset by your ancestors and didn't like what they did, you could go back in your meditations and rituals and say, look, guys, you behaved really badly, repent, say you're sorry, and I send you healing and blessing because only hurt people hurt. So you must be hurt. So I hope you get better. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. That doesn't seem very convincing to me as an argument, or as an idea, rather. But I don't want to disrespect that if that's what you do. And talking of respect, I want to challenge another sacred cow, which is the concept of respect. In a lot of paganism, there's this thing about, respecting your ancestors, respecting the past, respecting the gods, respecting this, that, and the other. That seems very adolescent to me. It's all that, oh, you don't respect me. Oh, it's like I need respect. It's like, to hell with that. It's like, if you're confident in yourself and you know what you're doing and you feel that you're acting out of integrity and honesty and you are who you are and you have your failings and foibles and all the rest of it, but so do we all, then you don't need anybody to tell you that you're great or that they respect you. I don't want anybody to say they respect me, and I don't want them to say they disrespect me. I'm just not interested. It's not a concept that I'm interested in. It's a concept of respect. And so respecting our ancestors, what does that mean, really? It kind of feels just hollow to me. I can appreciate what previous generations have done for us, for me. I can appreciate what, my father and mother, all the love that they gave me and the help that they gave me, and going back through the generations. I really appreciate that. They don't need my respect. Well, what is that? I don't know. It's like that. No, love. I love them for all the positive things they gave to me. They didn't really give me any negative things, my parents, but I would imagine that my ancestors prior to that, there's probably some horrendous traits that I have that have been passed down. To that, there's a lovely exercise we do in the OBOD, the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids training, where we turn around, we get into a very deep state, and then we turn around to face the great fan of ancestors in front of us, mother and father, and going like that, huge, and we thank them for all the gifts that they have given us, all the positive things. Thank you so much. We render that conscious. It's not about respecting. They don't need our respect. We don't need to do it. We thank them. And then we say no to all the stuff we don't want. No, I'm not interested in your racism. I'm not interested in your prejudices and your cruelty and all the nonsense. Thank you. No, thank you. Goodbye. And that's it. So if you say, well, hang on a minute, if you're saying, this whole ancestor thing isn't interesting or worthwhile, really, apart from sort of fleshing out your story and coloring it, if that's of interest to you, if it's not of interest, and if really the future is what's called it, if the future is this kind of strong influence on me that I should kind of be more interested in, where do I put my veneration? Where do I put my spiritual interests and love and so on? Well, what I'd suggest is the tree. For me as a druid, the tree is this powerful, powerful image. And as I said, we do venerate the roots and love the roots and thank the roots and all the rest of it because they're absolutely vital. But we don't keep digging them up, and we're not preoccupied with them. When we do a meditation or a ceremony, we might spend a few moments connecting with the roots, with the earth, with Mother Earth, and so on, a few minutes. And then our focus is on, if you like, the trunk and the boughs and the leaves, the present and the future. So a project like the Children's Forest, which I love, which is an organization that teaches children to love trees, teaches them about trees, gets them singing about trees, gets them planting trees, and then gets them meditating in a beautiful way, visualizing a future grove or plantation, and then going out and planting them on people's lands. And you can just look up childrensforest.earth, I think it is. And it's a fantastic project. So that's what I think is interesting. And yes, so I'd like to leave you with that. And I started by saying I wasn't sure whether I believed what I said, what I'm about to say, until I say it. Well, I've said it now, and I believe it. I'm not just saying this to be provocative or to only present the devil's point of view, being a devil's advocate, I should say. I'm doing it because I think these ideas are certainly worth entertaining. And like any idea, there's often its opposite, and we need to consider that too.
Hi, I've just listened to that film that I made for the Scottish Pagan Federation, and I just wanted to add this little postscript onto it. Still agree with what I said, but I wanted to make a couple of points. How come I find myself saying that even having said all that, I'm looking forward to Samhain in a few weeks' time, that it's my favorite ceremony. I find it so profound. And that ceremony is about connecting with the ancestors, with people who have left the physical plane. Maybe I find it profound because every year more friends and loved ones have died, and there are more people to send our love to and to think about. Am I thinking about people who've, as I said in the film, have sloughed off their personality and aren't, are in a completely different state? Are they somehow still in the other world? Because there is that question. I hope I didn't convey the fact that I knew. Say that I knew what I was talking about. That I know for sure, any of this stuff, this is all tentative, and I think it's our job as to explore these issues. And I know that for me, when my Druid teacher, Ross Nichols, Newen, died, I've had the most profound experiences from, say, 9 years after he died, for another sort of 5 or 7 years after that. And it was as if he really was on the other plane, talking with me and advising me and so on. So maybe this second death idea isn't quite correct, or maybe it doesn't happen straight away. Maybe we go through a second death after a certain amount of time in the other. Who knows? Who knows? All I know is that when I perform a Samhain ceremony, I find it deeply moving. I have a sense of connecting to beings who are no longer incarnate on the earth. And it feels very magical and special. And why have I oh, you can't see it with this funny thing here. This, oh gosh, isn't this strange? How can I make this work? Ancestral Whispers by Ben Stimpson. Why have I endorsed that book? Guide to Building Ancestral Veneration Practices. I'm going to ask Ben, I think, if we can have a discussion together about this whole question, because he's written an excellent book about working with the ancestors. Highly recommended. So why? Because I don't think it's a closed question. I think these are questions to ask ourselves, to entertain, to be open to. I think as well, in the previous film, I sort of went on too much about this respect business. I'm not sure anybody is asking us to respect our ancestors. I don't think that's really the issue. Connecting with, linking with, thinking of, but maybe people aren't asking. So maybe that whole piece was unnecessary. I don't know. And of course, the other thing I need to point out is that, I'm speaking from a privileged, white, middle-class, male English perspective. And my ancestors in my genetic line have not been oppressed, as far as I'm aware, whereas it will feel very different if they have been, and so on. So there's all sorts of things to consider. Not only that, but also, if you believe in reincarnation, if you sense that you've been in other countries in other times and all the rest of it, then there's this interesting question of, well, who are your ancestors anyway? Are they simply your genetic ancestors? Or are your ancestors indeed from many different parts of the world? And I guess my thoughts are all sort of summed up in a thought that came to me when I was writing The Druid Way, and which I use on the Tea with the Druid broadcasts, which is the songs of our ancestors are the songs of our children. And so for me now, this particular time of my life, I'm interested in the children. And I just feel when I connect to this sense of the ancestors that they are too. They're looking forwards and encouraging us to look forwards rather than back. That's it. So blessed be, have a lovely conference, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts with you.
Hello. Well, I'm back again because having added that little postscript to my film, I thought the logical thing to do is to try to summon the Ben Stimpson. I mentioned his book, his amazing book about the ancestors, and he's delved into this question so much. And I'm going to do a bit of magic to see if I can summon not only his spirit, but his physical representation as well. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and Ben, are you there?
Oh, hello.
There you
I'm
are.
here. I don't know where I am, but I'm here. Hello, Philip. How are you?
Hello, lovely to see you. That's great. That's great that you're here with the magic of this technology. You're over in Canada. Yeah.
Over in Canada, yes. For now. Over in Canada for now.
Yeah, great. So this is a film for the Scottish Pagan Federation. And you've very kindly seen the little film I made, a 24-minute film with my ideas. Tell me, what was your reaction when you watched that film and listened to what I said?
I actually wasn't provoked because I agreed with a lot of what you said, but I think I would take it in a very different way. So I agree very much that it can become very, very unhealthy very quickly with ancestor work, depending upon how people do it. But I do think that there is a value in ancestor work. It, again, depends on intention, and it depends on relationship. So that's where I'm coming from with this conversation today.
So, okay. So talk to us about intention, first of all. This seems a good way to split it up. Let's talk about intention and then talk about relationship. What do you mean by that?
Absolutely. So I would say let's talk about relationship first. To me, intentionality and intention really buttresses relationship. And you have to, I think, in any spiritual sense, with any spiritual guides, in any spiritual sphere, have to be thinking about the relationship that you're wanting to gain, the relationship that's existing already. And then that is how intentional it comes out of that. You can become even more intentional with that sort of relationship. So to me, I feel like all of spirituality is about relationship. It's relationship to self, relationship to spirits, relationship to the divine, if you believe in a divine. And so then there's a transition point between intention, which I feel is just in the mind, and intentional, which is intention in practice, intention in action. And so I feel like with ancestor work, what oftentimes, why I wrote the book in the first place was I saw a need, because I feel like many people in the Pagan community are not really sure what to do with the ancestors. You know, there's these ancestors that are vaguely there for us, but because of the Christian paradigm that we exist within, many of us in the West anyways, there's not really a sense of who they are, what role they fit, because within that Christian worldview, they're supposed to be off in an afterlife that is inaccessible, and any ancestor that is close by is dangerous or could be a demon or malevolent. So that piece around then relationship, you're already at a strange place, because then how are you relating with these if you're not really understanding what they are? How can you relate to them if you don't know what role they're supposed to take in your life? And I think this is where people, and this comes back to what you were saying, people then get hung up in the past. But I think that because of the worldview that we exist within, people don't relate to the ancestors, they relate to the stories of the ancestors. To bring in that psychotherapy piece there, the internal family systems piece, the story that is handed down to us over the generations. And we get locked into that story then. And sometimes that story is incompatible with the story that we're telling about ourselves. And so we create new stories about the ancestors, in which case then we're so focused on the past and what the ancestors did or didn't do, or what we believe they did or didn't do, that we're not forward looking, as you were saying in your blurb before I poofed into existence here. Yes. And so in that way, I really do agree with you that it becomes a very unhealthy thing.
Yeah, because there's so many ways one can conceive of the ancestors. And I know in your book, you start at one of the early chapters is, what is your concept of the ancestors? And you introduce various ways of looking at it. I mean, can I ask you personally, what do you believe do you believe your ancestors are kind of in another world? Have they already gone through some kind of second death and have reincarnated somewhere else? I'd love to hear.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, that ties into the big question of the very first chapter: is what is life? How do we even consider this concept of personhood? And to me, I don't see myself as so linear anymore. I see myself as being composed of various different parts. And so to me, this question of are the ancestors reincarnating or are they in some sort of afterlife is a moot point, because I say both. I think that an aspect of self is in an afterlife. Personality, the small aspect that existed on this planet for a certain amount of time, goes off into some sort of a warehouse. I mean, I don't think it's a warehouse, but it's probably prettier than that. And then another aspect of the soul goes on to engage in a new life, to grow and evolve. And I feel like at the very end of time, if we see time as timey-wimey, all of those little pieces come back together again. And what we're left with is some thing.
Because it's so interesting, because it's so dependent upon our relationship to time. And in my afterthought of that film, I talked about how, with Nguyen, there was such a strong, 9 years after he died, I had this really powerful contact with him. And then for, about 7 years afterwards, there was this real sense of him being a real being who was communicating with him. And this raises all sorts of questions about, was this a fantasy on my part? Was it a memory of how he used to be, and then I've recreated it? Was a sort of simulacrum of him? Did he leave some of himself sort of up there to communicate, and then the sort of core of himself carried on reincarnating? And I mean, there's like endless ways you can understand it. And one of the ways, when you said that you don't think in such linear terms anymore, when we have, the way we will occasionally have synchronistic or mystical or unusual experiences where we suddenly realize that, particularly precognitive ones, actually, when you have a dream and then the next day, and it can be something very mundane, but you're actually going through what you dreamt about the night before, and you think, hang on a minute, I dreamt about this the night before. And it's very uncanny. And it brings to mind, physicists, when they talk about the nature of time, that everything has already happened.
Yes.
Yes. And yes. maybe we all exist in that dimension, and we're sort of going in and out of awareness and all the time. I don't know. Yeah.
I certainly tend to see the world and reality in that way, at least currently now myself. A concept I work a great deal with is the Anglo-Saxon and Nordic Scandinavian concept of weird. That idea of constantly unfolding, constantly becoming. There have been an infinite number of Bens. There's been an infinite number of Philip Carr-Gomms. Every single moment is a different version of you just existing in that moment. The only reason that we see or think that there's a being that is moving through time is because those little snapshots are being played, right? And so there's been that idea that that we are constantly becoming, in the same way that everybody else is constantly becoming. The tapestry is being woven. And there are certain ideas of what that tapestry might eventually look like, or should eventually look like. There may be certain things that have already been placed to stabilize that tapestry so that you work towards that place. But how you get there, what threads, are ultimately in our own purview. This is forward thinking, though. This is looking to the future. It's that cause and effect relationship. We're understanding of what the context that we're existing in now comes from our actions in the past, in the same that we have empowerment to then affect the future in that way. But nothing's really set in stone.
Yeah. Yes. No, that makes a lot of sense. But let me ask, in the light of that, then, I started my talk off by saying any ancestor worth their salt will be urging us to look into the future and to think about future generations and the children. And will say, don't spend too much time with me to move. And you said you felt that very much as well. And various people I've shown the film to actually have said the same thing. And yet the subtitle of your book is A Guide to Building Ancestral Veneration Practices. So why would I want to build an ancestral veneration practice if I was wanting to focus my energy on looking forward?
Absolutely. This is a strange one for the Western mind to comprehend, again, because of that Judeo-Christian point of view. If you look at most cultures around the world that are animistic in nature, there's this sense that then that the ancestors have a direct role or have a hand in kind of the unfolding of time going forward. They have their agendas. Certainly the agenda for the ancestors, I would say, is the perpetuation of life, the perpetuation of the lineage, the perpetuation of humankind. And so in my own experience and some of the spiritual traditions I've been part of, the concept with that is that the ancestors are going to push you to be the healthiest individual that you can be in order to be the healthiest agent of change so that the future will unfold in a healthy way. So ultimately, the ancestors are not really interested in you. Yes, they are. No, they're not. But they're interested in you being a good agent so that you can undo the stuff that they did when they were living and not perpetuate it, and also push you into a healthy place. Right? I've noticed that in my own family, for example, the major blessings that come into my family are often the ones that are pushing my siblings into having kids. So through that veneration practice, it's that building that relationship so that you are both learning the context from them, but also understanding what you can let go of. Because I feel like, coming back to your point, people then with genealogy work, one of the horrible taglines, and I'm not a big fan of it, is, go onto ancestry.co.uk and find out who you are. Well, you're not finding out who you are. You're finding out who your ancestors were. But their stories are their stories, right? not your own story. It's the context, though, that you came into the world. So it's about a clearing.
Build the story of who you are in your own mind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you don't get trapped in that story.
That's the thing, isn't it? And I can see, one of the reasons I think, I mean, in the ovate grade in OBOD, there's a focus on, getting to know your family tree, getting to know your ancestry, looking at precisely this question of ancestral veneration practices and so on, because it's like becoming aware of the context, your roots. An image that comes to me, when you were talking about your siblings, the ancestors urging your siblings on to have children, is, it's a bit like the role of a grandparent. If I think of, I have grandchildren and I love them, I want them to go into the future. I want to give them enough kind of strength and health and well-being and inspiration, all the rest of it, not to constantly be with me, or there's a kind of neurotic part of me that would love them to around all the time, till they were big people, but really, for them to go out into the world and I've got their backs, and I suppose that's one way of understanding it is that if you let go of mortality for a moment and just see all these generations, whether they're sort of incarnated or not, whether they got bodies or not, but they're going back through the centuries. And they're all kind of, they're rooting for you and kind of urging you onwards. And as you say, to, at some very basic level to reproduce, and to continue the evolutionary program. And how can building altars, spending time, I find it fascinating that probably the most powerful ritual of the 8 rituals a year that we do in OBOD, the Pagan Wheel of the Year, is Samhain. And Ema Burke, the current chief of the order, interviews somebody every week in a YouTube thing called Fireside Chats with Ema. I think you've been on one of them, haven't you?
I was on it, yes.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah. Yes. She always asks at the end, she always asks her interviewees, which is your favorite ceremony? I haven't analyzed it, but it feels like 70% of people, 80 to 60, 70. Yeah, it would say Samhain. Yeah.
I think that there's a primal interest with Samhain, particularly in spirituality, because spirituality and the spiritual traditions that have flowed into paganism tend to be, again, focused on those outside spaces, those uncivilized spaces, those places of liminality, right? As a queer person myself, I'm looking around and I'm seeing so many queer people involved with OBOD, with folkloric witchcraft, with all of the various different forms of spirituality that has been othered. And I think with Samhain particularly, it's that place of, I think it's one of those major holidays that cause a lot of distress for people in a social setting, because it's about death, it's about waning, it's about aging, it's about the darkness, and I think that for any marginalized people, any bullied people, really, I would suspect the vast majority of OBOD members and many of the people at this conference were bullied and made to feel other when they were younger. I know that was my experience, certainly.
Right.
We're the weird people, we're the strange people, we're the ones who, are interested in going to the library instead of playing footy, I mean, I'm generalizing there, but I feel like that then gravitates, and that's a powerful place for us. But it's also a sense of that new year. It's a sense of that liminal space of both looking back and looking forward. I think the other holidays have that too. Beltane certainly has that quality too. But I think that the idea of Beltane, where it's too warm and people get sweaty and it's a little bit too much, right? Doesn't quite fit with the nice comfy weather of Samhain.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a strong sense, as you say, of otherness and otherworldliness in the sun. It's as if we consciously just the idea, and I'm not sure to what this idea exists in the wider pagan community, but within OBOD Druidry, we say that for 3 days time ceases to exist. It's kind of paradoxical that we define the length of time. Right. Time doesn't exist, but we say time doesn't exist, and that's a very magical idea. That
very much so.
for 3 days. You know, time doesn't exist. And that allows something else to come in, doesn't it? It allows us to come in. And all these questions about, you know, are you dead or alive? Were you there in the past? Are you there in the future? Sort of cease to sort of make so much sense.
This is the thing.
And it's a thing, and it's a communion. It's a kind of communion with spirits, with the other world, with those who have gone before us, and maybe with those who are to come as well.
Yeah. This is the ultimate thing with the ancestors, right? Within many traditions, the ancestors are the ones who are holding those who are coming as well. So that state of death is one of the most primal fears. And in part, I think that's why some people want to work with the ancestors, really to assuage that fear of death, the ultimate fate for all of us, right? I mean, sure, Elon Musk might feel like he's going to survive, but that's him. But it's that sense of timelessness, it's that sense of liminality, the state of death, the place of death, however your culture sees it, is ultimately a place where you can encounter your grandmother, grandfather, you can encounter your descendants, you can encounter the original fish that flopped out of the sea that eventually evolved into all of us, right? There's no sense of linear time in the state of death.
Yes.
Everything's happening all at once. And I think that's powerful. That's powerful.
Well, Ben, thank you. It's such a big subject, isn't it? We could do like a 3-hour deep dive into this quite easily. But thank you for writing Ancestral Whispers. We're going to recommend it in the Ovate for Ovate students in the order, and for anybody. And
thank you for endorsing it too, Philip. That was amazing for you to sit down and read it. That was amazing. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. So we'll say goodbye to everyone at the Scottish Pagan Federation. Thank you, folks, for listening, and have a happy Samhain, a good Samhain.
Goodbye, everybody.